Count Corla, Taoiseach, this is a budget, as Jed Nash has so memorably said, for burger barons and big builders with broken promises for everyone else. And there is real anger out there, because there is a whiff of 2008 about this budget, with a strong seasoning, indeed, of Galway tent. In other words, it stinks. There are giveaways for fast food chains and for developers, but nothing for workers or families. Derisory measures for children in poverty, for those in housing insecurity or homelessness, or for disabled people. Lots of spin, but no substance. It's safe to say, Taoiseach, this budget contains the single most right-wing tax package in living memory. As the Fiscal Advisory Council points out, the full-year cost of the lavish pro-big business tax cuts is €2.3 billion. Taoiseach, you said the poorest would benefit. But we've seen the Parliamentary Budget Office analysis, which shows that income poverty will increase after this budget next year due to the removal of the once-off payments. We have it here. Just came out this morning. The PBO tells us that child poverty will increase next year as a result of the budget measures. Taoiseach, you said that we should look at your documents. Well, I've looked at this document, and we see middle-income households are also hit. The guide provided at the back of the tax policy change document shows this. It shows the changes for different income levels and family types, but there's a deliberate omission. No reference to couples with two incomes, to two-income households. Nothing in there about dual-income households. Why? Because they'll be worse off after this budget, and the inadequacy of measures would be starkly evident if they were included. You've left out dual-income households in a number of senses, left out middle-income households. Why? Because they've been left out of the giveaway, left out in the cold. You boast a budget that contains targeted permanent measures. They're targeted, all right. Giveaways for developers, for large restaurant chains, but disappointing for so many others. For students facing a €500 fee increase, for parents seeing no reduction in childcare costs, for families who are getting no help in addressing the cost of living crisis, and for renters with no radical reset to increase the supply of homes. Indeed, it seems you've given up on people without a home. The height of the ambition in this is capped at investing more in hostel accommodation, not on ending the housing disaster. And Taoiseach, you know it's a bad budget when the Minister is forced to boast about retaining the Christmas bonus. There are welcome measures. We acknowledge that. We welcome the expansion of the Living City initiative. We had fought for this. We welcome the announcement of a new derelict property tax, but the timelines for both are so long out that we may never see them take effect. We welcome the increase in minimum wage, but where's the pathway to a living wage? And we've welcomed the income disregard increase for carers, something that Mark Wall and all of us in Labour had pushed for years. But where are the meaningful changes for disabled persons and carers? We welcome the move to make permanent the basic income scheme for artists, but this was a Green Party initiative from the previous government, accompanied, let's not forget, by an overall cut in spending for culture and the arts. And we welcome the allocation for the Football Academy, but our Aon O'Riordan deserves a lot of the credit on that, to get the ball rolling on it. And I do take issue, Taoiseach, with your charge that opposition parties, and you've lumped Labour in with all opposition parties, it seems, that we're anti-enterprise in some way. Far from the truth. You've said opposition are anti-enterprise and not supportive of job creation. We're the party, well, excuse me, Labour are the party of jobs. We have a proud record, uniquely in opposition, of job creation. And we have a proud record of standing for workers' rights. We do not take economic growth for granted. And we welcome measures to support innovation, to support Enterprise Ireland, to support the development of AI. Absolutely, we welcome these. But these positive moves that you've made are overshadowed by what is clearly the worst political choice in this budget of bad political choices. Your VAT cut. Your VAT cut for hospitality and hairdressing has to be the worst choice made in this budget, and with one of the longest run-in times in history. Nobody could say you hadn't time to change your mind. And it seems extraordinary to us in Labour that this crazy VAT cut is the one election promise you decided to keep this year. It was a VAT cut we in Labour uniquely opposed. We did not include it in our manifesto last year, we did not include it in our budget of last year, nor in our budget for this year, because we don't believe in narrowing the tax base in this way, and with no evidence that the reductions will be passed on to consumers, or indeed that the reductions will save jobs. This VAT cut costs €232 million in 2026. It will cost that. It will cost €681 million in a full year. And let's look at what you could have got for that. It would cost more than introducing a €25 cost of disability payment that we in Labour had pushed for. It will cost more than abolishing the means test for carers, which we've also been pushing for. will cost more than capping childcare fees at €50 per week, more than extending the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance to every child in the country. So you've made a political choice to reward businesses with the highest turnover who will benefit most from this cut, with zero evidence on the impact of any positive impact for job retention or indeed for consumers. And worse again, many of the massive food chains that will benefit most are franchised to private equity firms, lots of them feeding the pensions of people not living in Ireland. Others are owned, indeed, by individual franchisees, but they're posting record profits. We've looked into this, Taoiseach. Take a sample of those franchisees operating individual McDonald's branches in Ireland. One operator's most recent financial reports recording accumulated profits of €8.48 million. Another seeing a post-tax profit of more than €13 million in 1 year. These are the winners. These are winners, companies with high profits in a sector paying the lowest wages with the most exploited workers. Companies feeding nutritionally poor quality food, mostly to those in Irish society who have the least. In other words, your VAT cut is a direct wealth transfer to faceless fast food multinationals. A whopper, in fact. A big fat nothing burger for the rest of us. Not a spice bag or a snack box. A smack in the face box for most communities. A euro saver for sure, for those at the top, nothing for hard-pressed families or small independent businesses. Just as you caved to lobbyists on this VAT cut, so you've caved to the demands of landlords and developers too on the housing package. Instead of a winter blitz on vacancy and dereliction, as we in Labour had proposed, you've proposed a new tax. We welcome the derelict property tax, but it won't take effect until after 2028, it seems. We would have increased the vacant home tax to 10 times the local property tax. But by contrast, what we saw announced yesterday will be ineffectual in driving the change needed to address the scourge of vacancy and dereliction. Instead, you have a tax package for developers and speculators worth €500 million in just 1 year, and you've kicked the can on the residential zoned land tax. Your allocation on so-called temporary housing solutions is an admission that our shameful rate of homelessness will go up, with more evictions, more children, to add to the 5,000 shamefully in homelessness. With our Children's Charter, last year, Labour developed a pathway for giving every child the best start in life, for ending child poverty. And that certainly kicked Fine Gael into gear. Nearly every speech the Taoiseach made during the general election was peppered with references to addressing child poverty, and that was welcome. But no sooner was the election over than you dropped that too. And we're seeing no second-tier child benefit in this budget, no reduction in class sizes, and post-primary schools excluded from the hot school meals programme. So it seems that you in government, when it comes to wealth transfers for developers, are happy to name your price. But despite announcing it twice now, you won't or can't tell us how much you'll put into DESH Plus. And we want to see DESH Plus rolled out. But we're not seeing any detail on this. On childcare, this is a real damp squib. Deputy Marie Sherlock has pointed out you're funding 2,300 additional places through building blocks, but there's about 50,000 children on waiting lists, and no sign of that promised monthly cap on fees to €200 for childcare. So you're bankrolling a system that receives generous public funding, but with no guarantee of places, no universal access for hard-pressed parents. On the issue of energy and the climate crisis, again we're seeing far too little. More than 300,000 people in arrears on electricity bills, a further 185,000 people behind on gas bills. But Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Lowry Independents and Deputy Healy-Rae have kicked them to the curb. In the months leading up to this budget, we've seen eye-watering profits from major energy companies while they hike their prices for consumers. You were perfectly happy to issue blanket energy credits in recent budgets to everyone, even those who didn't need them. But now suddenly there's nothing left in the kitty to help families most at risk of poverty. And climate action in this budget is a real afterthought, and that's very disappointing. We're really seeing the impact of the Green Party's departure from government. We heard earlier just now the usual performance from Minister Healy-Rae, and we've certainly seen a Healy-Rae-shaped dent in funding to the Climate Department, reduced from last year's allocation at a time of climate crisis. Yes, investing in our grid is long overdue, and that's welcome, but the increase in retrofit funding is completely inadequate. And it's just as well you've built up your rainy day fund so much, because these funds will have to pay the upcoming flood of fines we will face for missing our emissions targets. There's nothing here, Ministers, for nature or biodiversity, no transition to sustainable energy, and on active travel measures, an effective cut when you account for inflation. Much of the public transport measures are already baked in, but on the inception of this government, I described your public transport policies as being summed up by the phrase roads, baby, roads, and we're certainly seeing more road building in this budget. First up, however, on the schedule of works is a resurfacing of the boulevard of broken promises, because never before has a budget document been so disconnected from the commitments that were made last year in your programme for government. And even more disconnected is this budget from the manifestos on which Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael canvassed voters for support less than 1 year ago now. And that's strikingly evident. What's also strikingly evident, when I travel the country, when I meet different families, different communities, different households, is what's really striking is how insecure people are feeling about the future. And we acknowledge in the Labour Party the global climate of instability, of uncertainty, with the brutal genocide in Gaza, with Russia's brutal war in Ukraine, and with the threat of Trump's tariffs ever pending, ever looming. We acknowledge that global insecurity. But at a time when we're seeing record budget surpluses, and when the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, and indeed Minister Canning, all boasted about the healthy state of the public finances at a macro level, at this point, this is when we should have seen in this crucial budget a measure of security for people, a commitment to giving security to families that are so hard-pressed in a housing crisis and a cost of living crisis. Because people feel insecure. And I know you're aware of this because you're hearing it too. You're hearing it from an older generation who are fearful for their own future in a creaking health service with a lack of provision for nursing home care, for care in the home. We're hearing it from young adults, from teenagers and young adults who are fearful of having any future in this country with a housing crisis, fearful of ever having the prospect of owning or rent, or even being able to rent a home of their own. We're hearing it from parents insecure about being able to find decent childcare and early years education for their children, desperate to secure places for children with autism, for children with additional needs, where there is simply so little available for them. So there is a great deal of insecurity. Workers who are squeezed by soaring prices, social welfare and social protection rates that have not kept pace with inflation. And we've recommended for years now indexing social protection, indexing to provide security to people who are so vulnerable. Our state finances, ministers, as I know you will acknowledge, are so dependent on the whims of multinational companies and the billions of taxes they contribute. And that level of reliance on what has often been described as windfall taxes, that level of reliance, of course, also generates an insecurity and an instability for many. And what we wanted to see in this budget from Labour as constructive party of opposition with a proud record on workers' rights and on job creation, what we wanted to see were provisions that would provide financing for public services into the future, financing to secure futures for workers, for families, for parents, for young adults looking to buy a home of their own. What we're seeing instead is a lack of provision for the future, a lack of provision for security and a lack of provision for housing, for care, for climate and for work. And this is what we fear is going to result from this budget. People will feel that common thread across generations persisting, a common thread of an uncertain future and an insecure present, a wealthy economy but a poor society, ravaged by a housing crisis and by spiralling costs of living, with nothing to address those spiralling costs for families and for households. So, ministers, in these times, people look to the government for increased security, for improved public services, for that minimum essential standard of living that will give them the security they need. They will not find that security in this budget.